August 15th, 1945, noon. Millions of Japanese citizens gather around radios. Radio sets are rare and precious. People gather in homes, in public squares, in workplaces. They're about to hear something unprecedented. The voice of Emperor Hirohito, the emperor, the divine ruler of Japan, speaking directly to his people. His message is formal, difficult to understand in places. He doesn't actually use the word surrender. Instead, he tells his subjects that Japan must endure the unendurable. World War II is over. Japan is lost. The war in the Pacific is finished. But what most people don't know, what the millions listening to radios have no idea of, is what happened just hours before that broadcast. Japanese soldiers, military officers, junior army commanders, they stormed the Imperial Palace. They were searching for something specific. The recordings of the Emperor's surrender speech. Their objective was extraordinary and desperate. Find the recordings, destroy them, prevent the broadcast. Stop Japan from surrendering. They were willing to overthrow their own government, willing to kill senior officers who stood in their way, willing to commit treason, all to continue a war that was already lost. I'm Keith Conrad, and this is Sidequests. Let's talk about Japan's last days. August 1945, the atomic bombings, the Soviet entry into the war, the attempted military coup to prevent surrender. And what these extraordinary events tell us about one of history's most consequential questions. Were the atomic bombs necessary to end World War II? By the summer of 1945, Japan is clearly losing the war. The Japanese Navy has been devastated, destroyed at sea, reduced to almost nothing. American submarines have strangled Japanese shipping. The lifelines of commerce and supplies are cut. Cities are being destroyed, not by atomic bombs yet, but by conventional bombing. American B-29 bombers drop incendiary bombs on Tokyo, Osaka, Nagoya. Hundreds of thousands of civilians are killed in firebombing raids. The capture of Okinawa puts American forces within striking distance of the Japanese home islands. An invasion seems imminent. Food is scarce. Fuel is scarce. Japan is running out of resources, running out of time. Everyone in Japanese leadership knows this, knows the war cannot be won, knows that Japan is facing defeat. But here's the crucial distinction. Knowing the war is lost isn't the same thing as being willing to surrender. Japan's Supreme Council, called the Big Six, is divided about what to do. Some leaders recognize that the war must end. That continued fighting is pointless. That surrender is inevitable. Foreign Minister Shigenori Togo is part of this peace faction. He understands that the war cannot be won, but other leaders, particularly military leaders, resist surrender. They argue for something called Operation Ketsugo, a plan to make an invasion of Japan so costly that the Americans will negotiate. The theory, if American forces invade and suffer enormous casualties, hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million, then Washington might agree to negotiate, might agree to terms better than unconditional surrender, might allow Japan to preserve the emperor, might allow Japan to avoid occupation, might protect Japanese leaders from prosecution for war crimes. It's a gamble. But to some in the military leadership, it's worth the risk. So Japan's leadership is deadlocked. One faction sees surrender as necessary. Another faction sees continued resistance as necessary. Neither side has the political power to force a resolution. Rather, Japan seeks a negotiated peace. Through intermediaries, the Soviet Union is approached. Perhaps the Soviets can mediate. Japan's conditions for peace are significant. Japan wants preservation of the imperial system. The emperor must remain in power. No Allied occupation of Japan. Japanese control over its own disarmament. Potential protection against war crimes prosecutions. In other words, Japan wants to lose the war but retain as much sovereignty and power as possible. This is considerably different from accepting what the Allies are demanding. Unconditional surrender, no conditions, no negotiations, complete defeat. August 6, 1945, 8:15 a.m. An American B-29 bomber flies over Hiroshima, a city on Japan's southern island of Honshu. It carries a single bomb, uranium-based, codename Little Boy. The bomb detonates, a brilliant flash, an enormous explosion, a mushroom cloud rising miles into the sky. In an instant, a city is destroyed, buildings flattened for miles. Tens of thousands of people vaporized, many more dying over hours and days from burns, injuries, and radiation exposure. It's the first atomic bomb ever used on a city, the first time humanity has unleashed nuclear power as a weapon. Information about what happened reaches Tokyo slowly. Details arrive piecemeal. Officials struggle to comprehend it. An entire city destroyed by a single bomb dropped from a single aircraft. It seems impossible. President Harry Truman announces to the world that America possesses an atomic bomb, reveals the secret. But here's something important. Hiroshima alone does not produce Japan's surrender. This is crucial to the debate. One atomic bomb, despite its enormous destructive power, does not break the deadlock in Japan's government. The military faction still resists, still argues for Operation Ketsugo, still believes that continued resistance is worth the cost. August 8th, 1945, 2 days after Hiroshima, another catastrophe arrives, not from the skies, but from the north. The Soviet Union declares war on Japan. For years, Japan has hoped that the Soviet Union might remain neutral, hoped that the Soviets might mediate peace negotiations. That hope evaporates. Hours after the declaration, Soviet forces launch a massive offensive against the Japanese Kwantung Army in Manchuria. Soviet tanks, Soviet aircraft, Soviet troops, millions of Soviet soldiers pouring across the border. Japan suddenly faces invasion from two directions, the Americans from the south and east, the Soviets from the north and west. It's a catastrophic development. Some historians argue that Soviet entry was actually the decisive shock, more important than the atomic bombs and forcing Japan to surrender. Others emphasize the atomic bombs as crucial. The truth is probably more complex. Japanese leaders were confronting both shocks simultaneously, making it difficult to isolate which was more important. August 9th, 1945, Japanese military leaders are meeting, discussing the Soviet declaration, discussing how to respond to this new crisis. As they meet, another American B-29 appears over Japan, a different bomb this time, plutonium-based. Codename Fat Man, it detonates over Nagasaki, a port city, another Japanese city destroyed in an instant. Two atomic bombs, 3 days apart. You would think this would force Japan to surrender. Surely after two atomic bombs and Soviet entry, the Japanese government would have no choice but to accept defeat. But the Big Six still cannot unanimously agree to surrender. The deadlock persists. Some leaders want to accept the Potsdam Declaration, the Allied terms for surrender, provided the emperor is preserved. Other leaders still demand additional guarantees, still argue for continued resistance. The government is paralyzed, unable to decide, unable to move forward. Traditionally, the Japanese emperor does not involve himself in cabinet disputes. The emperor is above politics, above day-to-day governance. But now something extraordinary happens. The stalemate is so severe that the issue is taken directly to Hirohito. The emperor, Hirohito, considers the situation, the atomic bombs, Soviet entry, the devastation of Japanese cities. He decides Japan must accept surrender. He specifically references the atomic bombs as a factor in his decision. The devastation, the newness of the weapon, the impossibility of continued resistance. Hirohito favors accepting the Potsdam Declaration with a condition: the emperor must be preserved. Japan communicates this to the Allies. The Allies respond, the emperor will remain, but subject to the authority of the supreme commander for the Allied powers. Japan accepts this condition. A surrender announcement is prepared. The emperor will address the nation. Surely now the war is over. Surely the government will accept this and broadcast the emperor's message. But something else happens, something extraordinary. Night of August 14th, a group of junior army officers refuses to accept surrender. They cannot accept that Japan will be defeated without continuing to fight. Led by Major Kenji Hatanaka, they decide to act. Their plan is audacious and desperate. Occupy the Imperial Palace, control the grounds, find the recordings of the Emperor's surrender speech, destroy them before they can be broadcast, prevent the surrender announcement from reaching the radio stations, convince senior military commanders to join the rebellion and continue the war. essentially overthrow their own government to keep fighting. They move quickly. Soldiers loyal to them enter the palace grounds. They search for the recordings, searching the emperor's quarters, the palace buildings, everywhere. When Lieutenant General Takeshi Mori refuses to cooperate with them, they kill him. They forge military orders using his name and authority. They occupy parts of the palace grounds. But here's what they cannot find: the recordings. The surrender recordings have been hidden carefully, protected, and despite their search, the coup plotters cannot locate them. Senior military commanders refuse to join the rebellion, see it as futile, refuse to support it. The coup begins to collapse. Major Hatanaka, realizing his rebellion has failed, kills himself. The soldiers disperse, and at noon on August 15th, the Emperor's voice goes out over Japanese radio. Endure the unendurable. Japan has surrendered. Now here's where the history becomes relevant to one of the most contested debates about World War II. The question, were the atomic bombs necessary to end the war? Different historians have different answers. The traditional interpretation, Japan wasn't prepared to surrender. The bombs shocked the leadership into accepting defeat. They forced a decision that might not have happened otherwise, and they avoided an invasion that could have cost hundreds of thousands, maybe 1 million casualties on both sides. The revisionist interpretation, Japan was already seeking an end to the war. Soviet entry was more important than the atomic bombs. Modifying the demand for unconditional surrender might have ended the war without atomic attacks. The bombs were unnecessary. A more nuanced interpretation, Japan knew it was losing. Some officials wanted peace, but the government had not yet accepted Allied surrender terms. Hiroshima, Soviet intervention, Nagasaki, and Hirohito's personal intervention combined to finally break the political deadlock. But here's what the attempted coup tells us. Japan's leadership was not simply waiting for an excuse to surrender. Even after everything, after Hiroshima, after Soviet entry, after Nagasaki, after the emperor himself made the decision to surrender, some military officers were willing to overthrow their own government to continue fighting. This doesn't prove that Japan could never have surrendered without the atomic bombs. But it does make one simplistic interpretation difficult to sustain. The idea that Japan's leadership had already decided to surrender and was just waiting for a face-saving excuse. If that were true, why would they attempt a coup? Why would they risk everything to prevent the broadcast? Because they genuinely believe the war should continue. Genuinely believe that continued fighting was preferable to surrender. The historical events of August 1945 reveal just how complex and contested the political situation actually was. One atomic bomb did not produce surrender. Entry did not immediately produce surrender. 2 atomic bombs did not immediately produce unanimous surrender. It required the emperor himself to intervene, something extraordinary in Japanese political culture. It required the emperor to personally break a deadlock that cabinet members could not resolve. And even then, armed officers attempted to overthrow the government and continue the war. The question of whether Hiroshima and Nagasaki were necessary, we'll probably never have a universally accepted answer. History doesn't give us the alternative timeline. We cannot know with certainty what would have happened if America had waited. If America had offered different terms, if America had not used atomic bombs, would Japan have surrendered? When? On what terms? There's just no way to know. What we do know is what actually happened. The actual historical events of August 1945 show us a government in crisis, a military desperate to continue fighting, a political deadlock that required extraordinary intervention to resolve. They show us a faction willing to commit treason rather than accept defeat. They show us a situation so unstable that even the emperor's decision to surrender could not immediately end the conflict. September 2nd, 1945. Japan formally signs the surrender aboard USS Missouri. World War II is finally over. The question of whether the atomic bombs were necessary will continue to be debated. Historians will argue, philosophers will wrestle with the moral questions, but what the historical record shows is this. Ending the Pacific War was extraordinarily difficult. It required multiple shocks. It required the emperor personally intervening in a political deadlock. It required suppressing an attempted military coup. Japan did not surrender easily, did not surrender immediately after one shock. Whether that tells us the bombs were necessary or whether it tells us Japan could have been persuaded through other means, depends on your interpretation. But the facts themselves are clear. The war did not end quickly or easily. Even after everything that happened, some Japanese leaders were willing to continue fighting. I'm Keith Conrad. Thanks for listening to Sidequests.